We should start.
All right.
So that's actually service. Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for coming out this morning to this workshop on creating an inclusive classroom. My name is Elizabeth Cohn, and I am a professor in the School of International Service. I'm also the faculty coordinator for teaching and student learning in SIS, and I am a former faculty fellow of the CTRL, the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning here on AU. I go by Betsy, but I mention Elizabeth in case you want to reach me through the, AU network.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leena Jayaswal. I'm a professor in the School of Communication, and for the last 2 years, I was the school's first inclusion officer. And Priya over here is now doing that job for the next year while we sort of all shuffle things, and I temporarily, and I use the interim word very loudly, Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs in the school, and I'm also the director of the photography program. So, yeah, which I have to throw out there because I just got approved. So, very excited for you all to be here, and I thank Betsy for inviting me after she reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm doing this workshop. Do you have any things that you could offer?" And I gave her a bunch of stuff that now is in your hands. And she said, "Do you want to do this with me?" And I said, "If you will lead, then I will do this." So I am here sort of in the backside.
She was voluntold.
Yeah.
Is the term. So let me just go through. And I've done a lot of workshops here for CTRL. Bless you. So the first thing I want to tell you is that what are the learning out? We have a very big agenda for today. This was at the request of CTRL. It was not my idea. And so as a result, what we decided to do was to break up into small groups so that people could take a piece of it. Because there's no way we could do all of it in 75 minutes. So my first charge to us all is to remember to breathe and to think about, good morning, if you could pick which table topic you would like to join. Whenever I do a teaching workshop, I always ask that faculty think about what's one thing that you can adopt from today's workshop into your teaching right away. And think about something that you might want to add later, okay? And in that spirit, because today, the learning outcomes, I'm going to tell you why I'm doing this, our learning outcomes are to discuss concrete ways to be inclusive in your course policies, assignments, readings, and syllabus language. That's a lot. Any one of those could keep us busy. And to create a plan to adopt strategies for inclusive participation. Okay? So we tried to, what we did, so why did I tell you the learning outcomes? Because you're going to evaluate us at the end. And one of the things that you were asked is, were the learning outcomes clear and were they met? So this, I'm modeling for you what you do in the classroom. You lay out the learning outcomes, you try to achieve them, so that you get good student evaluations at the end of the year. Our agenda, we will do introductions, name and affiliation only. If you could give us your full name in case somebody wants to find you in the AU emailing system. We're going to define what inclusivity is, thanks to Leena. We're going to meet in small groups as designated here to give us 25 minutes or so to really discuss in depth the issue that you have chosen. And then report back. Not everything. I'm going to model for you what I do with my students. And don't get scared. I know I'm intimidating. That one insight and one challenge. Right? I'll allow 2 insights if you really want. And if anyone starts with, and then we talked about, and then we said, we don't have time for that. Okay? Because we do, if we do have time, I want to open it up to a conversation. And then 3 minutes, this is probably the most important part of the workshop, pause to reflect. I try to do this more and more in my classes. Just silence in the classroom can be very powerful. Pause to reflect. There's no report back. It's you just saying, this is what I'm going to do from this, with whatever, and then 3 minutes for the evaluation. Okay? So we're starting a little late because I know it's hard to find the Butler boardroom. So, shall we start with introductions, name, and affiliation? All right. So, Leena.
Okay. So in one of the handouts that we gave you, that we sent out, and we understand that you may have not gotten to read them all, but there's some valuable information here that hopefully we'll be talking about. But one of the things probably about now going on a decade that I have included in my syllabus has been an inclusivity statement. And I've taken the language directly from AU and how AU defines inclusivity. And we could spend probably 6 days debating that as well, but we're just going to go with the lawyer-approved inclusivity statement. But since I'm the director of the photography program, I have all of my adjuncts actually include this statement in their syllabi as well. And so what it shows, and I'll read it in a second, but what it shows actually to the students who are in the class when we go over it the very first day is that if something arises on campus, they know that they have somebody that they can turn to who at least would be interested in hearing them or listening to them. So it really opens up the doors. And so here's my inclusivity statement. And CTRL's website has multiple versions of other inclusivity statements. So I said, American University embraces diversity in its broadest sense, including diversity of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, religion, nationality, disability, socioeconomic standing, and intellectual viewpoint. AU Photography supports a learning environment where inclusivity is respected and encouraged. Throughout the course, diversity and inclusivity may be part of the class discussions, readings, projects, or assignments. All students will be treated respectfully regardless of their identity. Every effort will be made to create an inclusive environment in this course. If you have questions, concerns, or suggestions, please feel free to speak to the professor or contact the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and given them their phone number there to reach out. So right from the get-go, the first day of class, when we're going over the syllabus, the students know that I care about this and that we're going to spend some time with this, and then when the conversations get a little uncomfortable, to be prepared. So this is where we're setting everything up. Again, we could talk about and debate what inclusivity means, but I think, we know that diversity is the people at the table. Inclusivity is making everybody feel welcomed, to speak, to give their opinion, and to share. And we'll talk through the breakout groups once Betsy kind of sets that up for us, how we can do that so that our students still feel like they can have diverging viewpoints and not attack each other and not make it into an uncivil situation.
Questions or comments?
This is so well written. Would you be open to sharing that? Would
Absolutely.
It be okay if we
Oh yeah,
pull off the
absolutely.
syllabus for-
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's what the hope is that we'll all come out of here with resources that we can all use and share. So, so anything, because Betsy also sent along my 10 tips for an inclusive classroom and 10 tips for the first day.
I actually haven't done that yet.
She hasn't done that yet? You will get those?
Specific reason. Let me just explain so I can interrupt.
Yeah.
So what I did was to take Leena's 10, she has 2 different handouts, there are 10 tips. I collapsed it into the 8, and those are the 8 topics that we had for today. And I did a little editing and a little addition, but that studies show that if you offer more than 7 options, people find it difficult to make any decision and feel overwhelmed. And so actually it's very interesting. I put out 8 because we couldn't decide. It's like, oh, we want to include that one. But you chose 6 tables. There were 2 tables nobody chose. So studies are right. A decision with more than 6 options. But I have your emails if you signed up for this workshop, and I'm going to follow up in sending those 2 handouts as 10 tips. Because I knew with 24 hours notice, it would be difficult for you to get too much information.
And so those are, so the last 2 years when I've been inclusion officer, I sent these emails out to our faculty and staff and adjuncts at the beginning of the semester so that they're just like digestible bites that, like, if one just does one thing out of those things, then it's already just starting the ball rolling. So you'll have that information, which will be a nice follow-up from our conversation there. And I'm happy to share whatever other resources that we've gathered together too. So yeah.
So when you go over the inclusivity statement on the syllabus,
Yes.
do students pause or ask questions, or is it how does it?
It varies from semester to semester, but then I actually go into like specifics of the course of, listen, we're going to be doing group projects, you're going to be doing readings. I've purposely given you readings that are contradictory to each other so that we can have a lively debate and discussion. And I said, I'm not going to tell you which ones I agree with and which ones I don't agree with, but it's important that we structure debate in certain ways. And then we'll go into ground rules, which I won't get into too much because that's part of the other thing. But yeah, I mean, it depends on semester to semester. If I have a group that is shaking their head and you can see that they're visibly excited about that, then we'll continue that conversation a little bit more. But otherwise, my syllabus is unfortunately 13 pages long, so we have to go.
And students no longer read the whole syllabus.
They,
So
that's why I have to go over
be,
that first
I
day.
think it would be 15 minutes well spent to discuss and take it apart. What does this mean? What does it mean to you? You can even put them in groups of 4 and say, what does it mean and what's one insight, so that people really, what would be hard about this to follow? How do we address it when...
Or what challenges they might even see coming up, just within the fact that most of my students know each other or have had class with at least somebody else in the room. So what challenges they approach from there. And I think, truthfully, I'll just say one last thing. I looked at my roster already for my class in the fall, and I have a former student who I know is going to be problematic, and I'm already thinking of how this statement is going to be drilled into them and how we're going to create, really try to work with that personality to make it where people do not feel offended, and because I just already know the student that I have. So, yeah.
All right. Any other comments? I think one of the hardest is the intellectual viewpoint. We have more and more conservative students who tell me they don't feel welcome on campus.
Absolutely.
And so I'll just say this now. One of the things I try to do, and this is in one of the hyperlinks that you will have, which is when you have someone with a different point of view or conservative point of view, since we are liberal AU, but what I try to do as the students respond to each other before it gets so hot that the classroom just is about to blow up, I will say, I take the idea and I put it on the board.
And I just say, okay. And I remove it from that one student, and I say, let's look at this idea. Why would someone think this? What life experiences would they have? What are the assumptions behind that statement? What are the implications? It depends on what I'm teaching, but what are the policy implications of that if you're teaching policy?
Can you give an example of an idea you might put up?
Well, it's when I teach a complex problems course. It's called Defining American, and we talk about racial inequality, economic inequality.
And what's something a student would say that you might want to?
Maybe what Joe Biden just said, right? In the news about, I can't get the exact quote.
Poor
Poor
people and white people.
Yeah, exactly. So something like that might be. He said that.
Yeah, he said that. He did say that. No, it's usually like something on race or immigration.
All right, so let's move into small groups. You are in your small groups, so we don't have to take the time to do that. I'm also modeling for you. If you've given the students that in advance, that they have to think about it, they don't just make the choice based on, I'm going to sit next to Eric, because I haven't seen him all day. So that you've got, we'll say 20 minutes, 25, we'll check in after 20 minutes to discuss this topic. And the first thing I would charge you to do is to look at the hyperlink on the handout. So because that's where some of the content is. So what we tried to do here is to give you some homework rather than lecturing at you what the issues are, because it's too much. And more and more what I try and do is I put on paper what I would normally lecture so that we can use the time. So let's take a moment perhaps and pull up that email or the hyperlink.
If anyone doesn't have it, I would ask someone in the group to forward my email to them. All right, everybody. So we have about 20 minutes left, and 15 really. I let the groups go on longer because we got a late start, and because I'm terrible at time management. This table here, what is your topic?
Our topic is use of language in your syllabus or class discussion, and so we have 2 points to make. The first is about pronouns and how important it is to be sure that we're using inclusive language and the pronouns that students prefer. And so we had a couple of thoughts related to that. One is several people use or distribute a pre-class survey. So they send a survey to students to get basic information, and they include the space there, what are your preferred pronouns, so that then you know what the student's preference is. The other point was to model, to just as you introduce yourself, to say, I use she, her, hers, and then other students, if they prefer, they may express what their preferred pronouns are as well. And so that was our discussion.
Can I interrupt?
Oh, yeah.
I have to interrupt. Thank you for that. This is going to be a teaching moment. The literature now says not to use the term preferred pronouns.
Okay. Yes.
That's like saying, what's your preferred gender, So it's to say, what are your personal pronouns? And I'm going to send out my student information sheet to everybody. And in it, because this is the way it's recommended that we do it, which is to ask on a student information sheet, what are your personal pronouns? You give them examples, and then you get it back from them. Because you don't want to ask them on the first day of class, what are your preferred, what are your personal pronouns, because that might be hard for someone. So you ask for your personal pronouns, and then you model it. So from then I'd say, Gina, what they had to say, and I would just use they if Gina tells me that they is her personal pronoun. There's I don't want to go too much on this because we could. But there is one of the hyperlinks that you're on your handout is the AU handout on personal pronouns. And you can follow up on that. It's quite good, and there's another one as well. Any other insight?
We had one other, but thank you for the teaching moment.
Yeah.
So one of our questions was about how do we handle using people's backgrounds in the classroom where they might have a background that is particularly relevant to the subject matter, but you don't want to call out an individual student. And our suggestion was that we had, on our first day, and probably also in the syllabus, an open invitation that if you are willing to share part of your background that may be relevant in the class, either because you are from a particular place or you have a particular experience in your background that you are willing to share, please let us know, either through email or in office hours, but not calling that out either in the moment or the day of. But so you already have a group of people you can go, oh, and you lived in Japan, so let's talk about that.
And make an assumption.
And don't make any assumptions.
Because they look Japanese and they might never have been to Japan.
Or current experiences of internships as well.
Right. That's also on my student information sheet that I'm going to send out. Next group.
Ours is establishing ground rules for the classroom. This was hard, but all of us teach foreign students, international students. I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to use foreign students or international students, but I'm just going to say international students. The first thing that we realized is they do not even have the concept of what ground rules are. They don't even know what it is. And then we agreed that certain places, they come from a place where it's established by the top, like the university itself. And then here in AU we have democracy where we all come together and try and establish rules in the classroom. However, the problem, the challenge that we had was that does every student in the class or in the group know that how do we understand? Or as teachers, do we even know they understand what ground rules are? How do we even establish that? Do you understand what it means not to use the phone in the classroom? That was our challenging part.
Can you explain how you might not understand how you...
I do not understand. Oh no, rather I do not know as a professor in the class whether my students even understand that this rule is here because.
By providing the rule as well as
Yes.
the reason.
And sometimes for us, it means that you have to change the language of the syllabus, so it's really, really simple. And sometimes I feel like, oh, if somebody like Dean or Dean reads over my syllabus and they're like, oh, wow, or she has really difficult to do it or something. But it's because I really want students to understand. So, for instance, we had a session yesterday, and there were, sample paragraphs or, sentences that you can put in your syllabus. So then, you can establish an inclusive. But once I looked at it, I thought there's no way that my students would ever understand what's written there. Especially, students who are still in the English Language Training Academy. I would expect once they join the mainstream classes, they should be somewhat there. But sometimes the language is, it's just really complex, and that could prevent the understanding of the ground rules.
And the hyperlink on the handout makes a very strong point about establishing those rules together, and that it's much easier to enforce. And then the other hard thing is you have to then enforce them. Right.
Just what we talked, yeah.
And that is a challenge.
Yeah.
You can't create. It's great to create an inclusivity statement, but then if you don't model it, you are just sending a very mixed message. That's being polite. And the same with establishing ground rules. And so that, I think, is a real challenge when a student, if the ground rule is no phones, and a student is on their phone. I think it's important to go back to the class and say,
So one of the suggestions I gave the group was to have, once the ground rules are established, to have a board like this that you can take with you and put it in your classroom every time, and so that they can refer right back to this, and we can say, hey, cell phones, number 2, over here, make sure you turned off. So just to have something that they remember it until they have it memorized.
And a point on that, having taught in AUX, this is something that they do routinely in every section of AUX, is the class comes up with a contract for ground rules. They put it up in the classroom every time the class meets.
Yeah.
really great idea. You guys good? All right. Next group.
Okay, so one of the things that we talked about, we are course content voices are you including. One of the great things I think we talked about was how do we get different voices into our course content without just selecting random content because, oh, this was written by a minority or a woman. So one of the suggestions was crowdsourcing. And apparently there are Facebook groups for academics, and I think we said academic Twitter is a hashtag. So there are different ways to crowdsource and actually use social media in a positive way for a change to get different voices and learn from others in your discipline what might be going on, different voices. And one of the challenges we talked about were bringing in different viewpoints that may not be our own, or students who may make comments in the classroom that can be offensive. How do we navigate those situations when other students are clearly uncomfortable? I don't know that we necessarily had a solution.
Do you have one idea or strategy?
I mean, I think one important thing to do when something like that happens is to pause and to acknowledge it, right? And then I think what's challenging often with the instructor in the classroom is they don't have an answer ready, and nor should they feel like they have to. I think a little bit of it is, okay, let's talk about what people are thinking, feeling at this point. And I like your idea of putting the controversial idea up, taking it away from the person who said it and putting it up on the board, removing it, so to speak. And then maybe get people to, okay, so let's talk about this. What are people thinking at this point? And if you feel like people can't process it in that moment, maybe you say, we're going to revisit this next class. So have a think, and maybe I'll have you guys write a reflection or something next time on this. But don't ignore it.
That leads into this group. Other things on course content that you want to add?
I would just say also on course content, when you're thinking about like how do I teach a course, like for me, history of photography, where I have to teach the canons, and they're all white men. So how do I include different viewpoints and things like that throughout the course where it doesn't feel like I'm just pandering, but that they also know and understand the history that they have to know, along with this other history. And one of the things that I do in the history of photo class is I actually make them do a research paper. I take it down to 10 topics, and students have to sign up for a subgroup. And I ask them not to sign up for something that they identify with, because they're probably going to learn that history on their own anyway. So one will be like South Asian photographers, or the queer photographers, or feminist photographers, or something like that. So I ask them to sign up for an identity that's not theirs. And they have to do a research paper on it for their midterm grade, and then they have to partner with somebody in the class and do a video presentation for the last class where we watch all of the videos, and all the videos are then on the exam. And of course I'm peppering artists throughout the semester, so even if they don't watch the videos, they'll know somebody for the exam question. But I make sure to intersperse that along with the canons, and I will call out the canons when they're problematic. I'll say something like, I'm showing you this. I'm showing you Edward Curtis's Native Americans portrayal, but let's talk about why this is now problematic. And so we don't like just say, here it is, here's the work, let's ignore it and not talk about the problems with it, but we address it as it goes along so that they're aware of everything at the same time.
I think that leads to you. Challenging conversations, right?
Okay. We didn't really designate it. Okay. So challenging conversations, managing challenging conversations. So echoing Priya's point, in the Harvard article we were referred to, we all agree that taking a pause or taking a break, whatever seems necessary or appropriate at the time, acknowledging the statement, asking for clarification to make sure that it was actually understood correctly and that this is all not based on a possible misunderstanding. And that's kind of as far as we all agreed in terms of like, what do you do? There were mixed views on whether we felt comfortable taking a student statement and putting it on the board, which could potentially make the student feel, they know what they said, and so at least for our group, it didn't feel like something we would necessarily feel comfortable with. We talked about the idea of perhaps having people write what they're thinking or feeling about the topic to kind of diffuse the sort of the emotion of it, but not not take away the possibility for discussion, and sort of do it in a maybe less emotional way.
I'd just say we would add that we also, agreed on proceeding with care and intentionality and thoughtfulness in what the instructor does in the midst of a discussion, the difficult discussion, not, imposing oneself, not abusing the authority that for good or ill comes from being in a certain spot in the class as opposed to another. And I don't think we had a great solution as to a golden rule on that, but I think we all felt that that was something to keep in our minds as well.
So some of this is when classroom conversations go from being inclusive to not inclusive and sort of managing it when it goes wrong. One thing I would like to advise is it's so tempting if you have one student who's problematic in your view to just talk to that student outside of class. And it's so tempting to just do that and not to address it in the classroom because it's really scary. What that does, though, means that the rest of the class doesn't know that you've addressed it. And they are just left with those bad feelings. So I think it's necessary maybe to talk to the student if it's one student you think is being problematic, or if there's two that are really going at it, and you say, okay, we need to step back here and let's, talk about this outside the classroom. But I think it's also we have to lean in and address it in the classroom. And whether it's by writing or speaking later, and as that Harvard article said, it's really important to just pause and say, hey, I'm not sure how I want to handle this right now or how we're going to proceed, so let's just take a minute and maybe we'll do it next class. And you get advice on how to handle it. Okay? But it's just,
I think just one last thing, because I loved what you said about acknowledging when you've made a misstep, coming back later and saying, I really didn't handle that well. And then the class sort of recognizes that we're on this journey together. Yeah.
Participation?
Yeah, so we both went to a session yesterday morning, and we agreed that we tend to think of class participation as like students speaking in class or talking in class. So, and one thing that we saw yesterday is like there are different flows of participation, and we should be aware of these different flows. So sometimes we think of the student to student, a student to professor, like in class, but there are other ways like student to self, so like writing reflections on whatever they thought of the class or the session. Student to student, so group work, anything related to that, and student to content, so quizzes or tests or anything else. Different ways of showing that students are engaged, not necessarily like in class on the spot, because language barrier or even like personality-wise, that can be a challenge.
I learned at teaching conference a technique. The professor asked a question, nobody said anything. And then he said, why is that question so hard? And I told that to a PhD student who was teaching our Intro to World Politics class, and he comes back to me a couple weeks later and he says, I did it! And he goes, I thought they hadn't prepared. I thought they hadn't done the reading. It turns out we spent the entire class, they were like, well, that point, I didn't understand the assumption. What does that term mean? Why did he say that? And it was like an amazing conversation that you think that they're not prepared. We make these assumptions, but so just to ask, if you're met with silence, don't fill it with lecture. Ask them, why is that question so hard?
And
Great
also,
way to
also asking double weight questions instead of like yes or no questions. So
right.
Force them to.
Our group was understanding and acknowledging your own assumptions. So as an insight, we decided that it was being aware of implicit assumptions and acknowledging them is hard. And one thing that we agreed on, I think, was to be alert and sensitive to the feedback we're getting from our students, because their comments or their actions can tell us that some assumptions we've made were incorrect. As for a challenge, when we talked about addressing inclusivity right at the beginning of the class, but we have to recognize that you can't just address it once and then forget about it and it's not one of them. So and we also need to recognize that our assumptions are always changing. So
And a point I also heard that was very important, which is as we start to understand our assumptions, how do we manage that and not be paralyzed by it and be so overwhelmed it's like, okay, I can't, feel like you're so constrained, I can no longer teach because I'm just thinking, what are my assumptions here? So it is about a learning curve and allowing ourselves to learn, make mistakes, correct them, and just keep going and remembering, there is content that we're still teaching. So I think that's every group. Burning desires, anyone? A comment that wasn't stated?
I've got a tip for you, one last tip. As you're working on your syllabus, think about the fonts you use, because there are fonts that are better for dyslexic students, like Helvetica or Arial, that are easier to read. So even down to the font choice that you use on your syllabus could be helpful.
So Helvetica.
Helvetica, Arial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Better than like New York, whatever.
Yeah. even Times Room, whatever
Yeah,
Times
Times.
New.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, font size, is there any, like,
I mean, 14 to 12 to 14 is usually pretty good. Yeah.
I would like to offer a couple of tips on using some Google Chrome extensions, and I'm not being paid by Google, so there's nothing. One is, and just to help establish an inclusive classroom, and because you mentioned dyslexics, there's Announcify. It's a Google Chrome extension, so if you ask students to add that to a Google Chrome, if you ask them to even read your syllabus that's in Google Docs, anything that's online, it will read it for them out loud. And
is it Announcify?
Announcify, yes.
Okay.
And then students can choose if they want a female voice or a male voice or a different accent. So there are all kinds of choices for it. Or to help students focus, ask them to add on something that's called Mercury Reader. Because what happens if you ask them to read an article, you know how newspaper articles or anything, advertisements on the side, at the bottom, in the middle, so it blocks everything out, and it's only the plain text that's there. So there's no distraction, and it really helps students, especially in the digital age, when I know that my son is 14, totally distracted by everything because all the information is just being thrown at them. That really helps.
That's good for me. Yeah.
So we've run out of time, but what I'm going to do is, not completely, so don't get up. So I'm going to email out to you some things from me and Leena, and I'm going to keep the addresses exposed so that you can hit reply all if you have any further ideas, okay? Any other resources or handouts that you'd like to share. I want to thank everyone. I want you to take just 2 minutes now for pause to reflect. We're not collecting this, just write. What's one thing you're going to adopt, or an approach, or something you want to do, something from this workshop?